All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into the U.S. government. Specifically, under the second Trump administration, we've got some excerpts here from Heather Cox Richardson's work. And, we want to figure out, like, what's actually happening in Washington? Who are the big players, and where could this all be headed?
Right. It's not just politics as usual. I mean, these sources are saying there's this whole push to completely change how the U.S. government even works.
Yeah, so the article jumps right into this idea, right, that there are these three totally different groups backing Trump. And each one has its own reasons, but they all want the same thing, like a much smaller federal government. So we're talking about, the hardcore Trump fans, the Mangier folks, the Project 2025 folks. And then this is where it gets kind of weird. A bunch of tech billionaires.
Yeah, that's an odd mix, isn't it? This kind of unlikely alliance. But when you really think about it, their goals, they all kind of line up, even though their reasons might be totally different. It shows how groups that want different things can come together when there's this one big thing they both want.
Yeah, it's like they're all pulling on different ropes, but they're all pulling in the same direction, right? Less power for the federal government.
Yeah.
And the article brings up some pretty extreme moves, like a huge shakeup at the FBI. Federal prosecutors who are working on, like, the January 6th cases, the election fraud cases, they're getting fired. Even the watchdogs, like the inspectors general, they're out.
And that's where it gets really worrisome. And those moves, they make it harder to keep things in check. It's harder to hold people accountable. You end up with more power in the executive branch, and it makes you wonder if the rule of law is even being followed.
Right. It's like you're taking apart the safety measures, the checks and balances that are supposed to keep the government from going off the rails. And then there's this crazy story about water being released from dams in California, apparently because of something Trump said on social media about wildfires.
Yeah, and that's what really gets you, that they're ignoring the experts, the impact this could have on people. It seems like a pattern of putting personal agendas ahead of facts, ahead of making responsible decisions.
Okay, so let's shift gears here and talk about this Project 2025, because this is where things get a little, well, creepy. The article makes it sound like a plan to basically dismantle democracy. They're using Viktor Orban's Hungary as a blueprint. It's all about rolling back rights, especially for women and minorities. They're pushing this very specific ideology.
Right. And that comparison to Orban's Hungary, it's important. I mean, you see parallels with what Trump's been doing, especially with immigration. You see it with the immigration sweeps, the migrant detention center at Guantanamo, trying to change birthright citizenship, and then the policies that target transgender people.
Yeah, it's a scary comparison for sure. And even more so when you see people like Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance, openly supporting this ideology. And the article even mentions that the CDC was told to avoid using certain terms in their research like gender and LGBT, which makes you think about censorship.
No, it really does make you wonder, how do you protect democracy when you have people actively trying to undermine it? It's something we all need to be thinking about and actually doing something about, right?
Yeah.
It needs awareness. It needs people to take action.
Okay, so let's move on to the tech billionaires who are involved in all of this. The article really focuses on Elon Musk. The guy behind Tesla, SpaceX, and X, the one that used to be Twitter. He put a lot of money into Trump's campaign.
Right. And Musk's relationship with the government is complicated. He wants government contracts. He benefits from fewer regulations. But then he's also part of these efforts to really slash the federal budget.
And those budget cuts, they could help his own companies, right? The article says Tesla didn't pay any federal income taxes in 2024, even though they made billions. And then there's this group, DOGE, that Musk leads, and they're all about shrinking government spending. It makes you wonder if there's like a conflict of interest there, especially since he's so interested in getting government contracts.
Absolutely. It does raise questions about transparency, whose interests are really being served here. And then you add in his control over the U.S. government payment system, the one that handles trillions of dollars, benefits, payments, contracts. It's a lot of power.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of power for one person. And remember, the article points out that Musk has these strong business ties to China. It makes you think about what's really driving all of this.
And this is where that idea of a chaos strategy comes in. The article highlights how a lot of these actions, they're vague, they're confusing. It's really hard to fight them legally when you don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, it's like trying to catch smoke. Everything's moving and shifting so fast, it's hard to even know what the real goal is, let alone how to hold anyone accountable.
Exactly. And the article brings up this idea of impoundment, which is basically freezing federal funds. It might seem messy, but it could be a way to get around legal challenges.
Wait, didn't a federal judge actually stop that funding freeze? I think the article said it was, like, unconstitutional.
You're right. The courts have stepped in to push back against some of this, but the fact that they're even trying these tactics is, a big red flag.
It definitely feels like things are coming to a head.
They do. And that brings us to this other really unsettling trend that the article talks about. It seems like loyalty to Trump is becoming more important than following the law.
Right, like the article said, a bunch of Trump's cabinet nominees wouldn't even answer questions about whether they'd refuse an illegal order from the president. They basically said they trust Trump wouldn't ask them to do anything illegal, which it's like they're putting blind faith ahead of the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a dangerous precedent. It weakens the whole idea that the law is supreme, not the whims of one person.
So we've got a federal government under attack from the inside. We've got this coalition of, strange bedfellows who all want to shrink it, and this worrying disregard for the rules.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
It really is, isn't it? A big question, what happens when someone's personal loyalty becomes more important than actually following the law? What does that even look like in our government?
It's a pretty scary thought. It's
Yeah.
like it's like throwing the rule book out the window and saying, "Well, we'll just do what we think is best." But who decides what's best then?
Yeah. And the article makes it clear this isn't just some theory, right? We're already seeing real life consequences from these actions. Like we were talking about the immigration sweeps, the detention center at Guantanamo trying to limit birthright citizenship. It's not just talk, it's impacting people's lives.
Absolutely. I mean, these decisions, they have real consequences for people. And it feels like the people who are already struggling, they're the ones getting hit the hardest. It just reminds you that politics isn't some abstract thing. It's about real people and their lives.
Right. It is. And the article also talks about the treatment of transgender people, which is really alarming. We're seeing attempts to ban trans people from the military, restrict access to like gender affirming care, even trying to force trans prisoners to detransition medically.
It's tough to hear about these things. It feels like we're going backwards when it comes to basic human rights. It just shows how important it is to protect those rights, to make sure everyone is treated equally under the law, no matter their gender identity.
I couldn't agree more. It shows how ideology, how it can be used to justify discrimination, to justify policies that hurt people. And it's not just individual rights that are being threatened. The article points out that they're trying to control information, silence people who disagree. We mentioned the CDC being told not to use certain research terms, the ones about gender and sexual orientation.
It's like something out of like a dystopian novel, right? Control the information, control the people. If you limit what people can read, what they can talk about, what they can research, then you're stopping them from thinking critically. You're making it harder for them to oppose what's happening.
Right. It's a classic authoritarian tactic. And speaking of controlling information, we got to get back to Elon Musk and those concerns about him having control over that U.S. government payment system. The one that handles Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, government contracts, trillions of dollars.
It's almost impossible to grasp. And to think that one person has that much power. And like the article said, someone with those ties to China, it raises some serious red flags about potential conflicts of interest, whether there are even enough safeguards in place.
Yeah, the article mentions that Senator Wyden is worried about whether Musk could use his access to illegally withhold payments or even mess with sensitive data. It's a huge responsibility. It affects millions of people.
It makes you wonder if there's even enough transparency, enough accountability. How do we know this system is being managed responsibly? How do we know there's anything to prevent abuse?
Those are the questions we need to be asking. Power, especially when it's concentrated like this, needs checks and balances. And the article reminds us that this is all happening against a backdrop of deliberate chaos and confusion.
Like a smokescreen.
Yeah.
Making it hard to see what they're really doing, hard to hold them accountable.
Exactly. And this isn't a new tactic. Throughout history, creating confusion and disorder, it's been used to weaken democracies and grab more power. So you might be asking yourself, what can I do about all this? What can any of us do?
It can feel overwhelming. But I'm guessing you're going to tell us that giving up isn't the answer.
Right.
You're right. It's not. It can't be. But man, with all this stuff happening, It's tough to know, like, where do you even begin?
Yeah, I get that. It's a natural reaction. But the article really stresses that being informed, really understanding what's going on, that's more important than ever. The more you know about what's at stake, about the tactics they're using, who the players are, the better you can respond.
So knowledge is power. Like what we're doing here right now, breaking down these articles, trying to figure out the big picture.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the headlines. It's about digging deeper, thinking critically about the information you come across. Think of it as like becoming your own fact checker. Question everything. Don't just take things at face value.
So like, become an investigative journalist.
Yeah.
Double-checking sources, finding different perspectives, always asking, is this even true? Where's the proof?
That's the idea. We need to be smart about the information we consume, especially now with all the misinformation and, propaganda flying around. The article talks about how important a free press is, a press that isn't controlled, that can hold those in power accountable.
Which means we got to support investigative journalism, right? Subscribing to reliable news sources, sharing stuff that's been fact-checked, and calling out misinformation when we see it.
100%. We need to be active in shaping the information landscape. But it's not just about reading and listening. It's about doing something with that information. It's about exercising our rights as citizens.
So voting, going to town halls, contacting our representatives, getting involved in local activism, that stuff still matters.
It absolutely does. Democracy needs active citizens. It can't just be a spectator sport. We're going to make our voices heard, demand accountability, and make sure our elected officials are living up to what we expect of them.
And the courts have been successful in pushing back against some of what's happening, like that funding freeze we talked about. The article said a federal judge called it unconstitutional.
That's right. The courts have a big role to play in upholding the law, supporting groups that fight for civil rights, for democratic values. That's another way to make a difference.
So it's a multi-pronged approach then. Stay informed,
Yeah.
get involved, support a free press, and use the legal system when you need to. All these tools, we can use them to hold power accountable.
Exactly. And it's not about being blindly against everything. It's about thinking critically, having reasoned debates, and working together towards a better future for everybody.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about. It's a reminder that democracy, it's not something we can just take for granted. We have to fight for it. We have to defend it.
It is. But it's also a reminder that we can shape our own future. What happens next, it depends on us. It depends on our willingness to get involved, to ask questions, to hold the powerful accountable, and to never, ever take our freedoms for granted.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned a bit more about what's going on with the U.S. government in this second Trump administration. And more importantly, that you feel like you can be a part of shaping our nation's future. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.